Alright, looks like we are live, everybody. Let me get the presentation pulled up. Today is Camera Basics. Let me go close the door real quick and I'll be right back. Alright, hello everybody and welcome to another camera class. My name is Saxon, your host. I've been doing this for a few years now, and today is Camera Basics. It's the first Thursday of the month. Now, I do want to give everybody a disclaimer for this month. I will be out of town for a few weeks, so camera class schedule is going to look different than it normally does, and I'll mention this at the end for anybody who joins later on. Today is the intro to cameras. Tomorrow is intermediate cameras. And then when I come back in town, we are going to be having class on October 24th and the 25th for advanced, and then beyond the traditional camera. So again, today is Camera Basics, tomorrow is Camera Intermediate, the 24th will be advanced cameras, and the 25th will be beyond the traditional camera. So I'll make sure I mention that at the very end. But without further ado, let's talk about Camera Basics. So why do we want to learn how to use a camera? For a lot of people out there, just using their cell phone or whatever they have available to them is enough. But for those who have been shooting or playing with photography long enough, you might see that there's an issue with how you're taking photos. You don't like the quality. Things don't look right on the camera. You don't have as much control as you'd like to have. You want more of a camera feel. These are all reasons to upgrade into the next thing. One of the biggest complaints, or one of the biggest things I hear about that prevent people from wanting to do that, is the fact that cameras have a lot of technical bits and pieces to them. So much so that people don't necessarily want to sit there and learn that, or they just don't understand it before they get into it. And so that's what this class is really geared towards. You're a brand new photographer or someone who's getting back into the practice. You bought a camera, you're in the market for a camera, and you don't understand what you should be looking for or what all the bells and whistles of that device do. So we're going to start from the very beginning part of it and graduate into some more advanced stuff in today. But really the idea is just to learn what the camera body is and what's on there. Now, I don't have anybody in class in person today, so anybody watching online, if you have comments or questions or suggestions or anything, keep it appropriate, chime in, message on the board here, and I'll read it out loud and answer that question for you. Last week we had someone ask about jewelry photography, so again, any type of question that you have, ask. I'll be more than happy to answer when it comes to cameras or anything camera related. Without further ado, let's jump into it. So where to go when all else fails? I like to tell people, start by reading your owner's manual. That helps a lot. It's usually a pretty thick book in there. If they don't have it, then you can find their owner's manual online as a printable version that you yourself can print. Imaging Resource is fantastic too. That's a blog style website. They have a lot of people that post content on there and ask questions and answer questions. They also have a podcast, which can be pretty nerdy, but is full of information that I think is valuable to any shooter, whether it's experienced or non-experienced. The next thing I recommend is checking out the Canon, Nikon, or Sony website, or whatever camera brand that you have. Even if it's Leica, Panasonic, Olympus, Fujifilm, all of them have fantastic websites that break down lots of information on your camera. They'll really give you step-by-step tutorials or understanding qualities like aperture, shutter, all that good stuff. YouTube is also one of my favorite recommendations, if not my favorite recommendation. YouTube has everything. We're streaming live on YouTube as we speak. But, for my best example, I had to redo a bathroom in my house. I completely redid it based on YouTube videos and tutorials on how to redo piping and how to do everything. Was there trial and error involved? Absolutely. But just like photography, it's all about trial and error and figuring out what works best for us, the photographer. So try all this out, look all this stuff up, try to familiarize yourself, because as much as I am one resource, I'm only one person. All of these companies, websites, and everything else have fantastic information to help you really learn about what it is that goes into photography and the art of it. So, without further ado, let's continue. Now we start with SD cards. Where do your pictures go? And make sure you have 2 of them. What does that exactly mean? An SD card is a chip that goes into your computer, into your camera. It's thicker, it's bigger, it's probably about 1 inch, maybe a little less than that in total size. The idea behind it is that it's what's saving and storing your pictures. Now, cameras don't come with one. You're going to have to buy and purchase one separately. I recommend getting something around 64 gigabytes or higher. And when you're researching and reading into these, look for something that has an appropriate read and write speed for what your camera is and what you're doing. And if you don't understand what that means, type in your camera model and see what they recommend as far as SD cards go, speed-wise and functionality-wise. But read and write speed is extremely important based on the camera model that you have. It's the dictation of when you're shooting that is the speed the card is absorbing the information. And when you go to download the information into your computer, that's the speed at which it's writing it onto whatever your next hard drive or saved disk is. And I always say to have 2 of them because it's important that when you're shooting, one card might fail on you, and if that happens, it'd be a real bummer if you didn't have another one. So having 2 is always a good and smart idea when it comes to photography. Now your picture shouldn't live on the memory card. It's not its final resting point. And the way that I look at the SD card is it's like it's a car. Think of your camera as your house and your computer as work. Your vehicle, your SD card, is going in between the 2 locations, taking images that you've captured on the camera, from the camera, and putting them to the computer. Once it's done, you can then delete the info and take the old stuff off once you've downloaded it into a safe place. But we'll talk a little bit more about that when I give you the step-by-step for what to do with your photos. But think about it as a vehicle that goes from one device to the other. It's your tool to save the images and move them to somewhere else. You shouldn't let them live on the card because, again, if they only are on your SD card and an SD card bugs out on you and stops working, you're going to lose all those photos and hard work that you had. It's much easier to buy a memory card than it is to try to retrieve thousands and thousands of photos that you might have lost. To make sure you don't lose or damage your card, these are my steps that I would go through to make sure that you have all of your images saved properly. So first and foremost, turn off your camera and wait about 5 seconds. This ensures that any finishing functions that the card and the camera are doing together have the proper time to do all that. From there, remove the card from the camera and place that into a card reader. Now, I like to try to say avoid using your camera to transfer photos to and from the devices, only because that there is more room for error. You could spill something on your computer, you could disconnect something from the camera, you could on accident drop the camera, which in turn could drop the computer. It's much easier to keep your space clean and clear of clutter. Instead of using the camera to transfer the images, just plug the SD card into your computer. With that being said, I would invest in a good card reader. There are lots of different card readers out there. These are just a few that we carry here in the store. But honestly, a $30 card reader is a small ask for you to get versus having to rebuy a brand new camera or, again, losing thousands of photos because you didn't transfer properly. So get one of these devices, throw it in your camera bag, keep it next to your computer, whatever is the most convenient route for you. Next thing is we're going to copy our photos to a destination folder. We're not moving them, we're copying them. And what I mean by that is by duplicating them from the SD card to the computer, we're running a lower risk of transferring the photos or moving them from one location to the other. If that transfer is disrupted in any way, shape, and form, the cards are basically going to and from. It's like if you ever dock a boat and you try to walk onto that boat, you yourself are walking onto that boat. If for whatever reason the boat moves away from the wall that you're docked on, you're going to fall into the water. So think about it the same way when it comes to SD cards. When you're transferring the information, you want to copy them from one location to the other, making a duplicate. Now, when you're doing that, make a destination folder. Now, some people will just put a random folder into their computer. That's fine, it works, there's no issue with it. However, if you could simply label your folder what the event was, you'll make your life a lot easier. Now, I'm a very anal person when it comes to my folders and how I have them on my computer. So I'm going to break down what I do with my information. So first and foremost, when I go onto my hard drive, I have a folder labeled for every single year that I've taken photos. When I click on that folder, I then get every month in that year that's available. Then when I click on that month, I have folders of every event I took pictures during that month. So for example, let's say my kids are on a t-ball team and it's the Cubs versus the White Sox. And they're playing a fall ball game right now on October the 5th. What I'm going to do is take pictures that day. I'm going to go through and delete the ones I like and save the ones I like, delete the ones I don't. Then from there, I'm going to make a destination folder labeled T-Ball Cubs vs. Sox 10/4/24. I'm going to put all the photos into that folder, and then I'm going to have that labeled within the month of October under the year 2024 so I can find and easily navigate through those photos. Then when I go onto my computer and let's say, 6 years from now, 3 years from now, I want to make, a really cool print of photos of my kids when they were younger, when they played sports. I then have the ability to get to those photos in a faster manner. So if we can make sure that we label destination folders, it'll help us in the long run be able to find and get to everything a little bit of a quicker manner. Next thing we're going to do is copy those photos to a second place. I would recommend an external hard drive or some form of cloud-based solution, something like Prime Photos or Google Drive. An easy way for you to move your photos to one location to the other, making sure that you have a duplicate copy in more than one source, more than just your computer. Next, eject the card before physically removing it. Don't just pull the SD card out. You could damage it, you could lose things. Eject the card first fully. Format the card in the camera once you're done. Formatting will erase all the old info on the card, plus it'll make sure that the card is primed and ready to go for that specific camera. And if you want, you can still delete them in your computer. I just think it's easier to put the card back into the camera, click format, and let that do the damage, or do the work for you. Here's your backup plan, step-by-step, illustrated with photos. Your images start on the SD card. That's your main way of saving your images. They then, from the SD card, can be moved to the computer. I should say copied to the computer. From once they're on the computer, you want to put them in one of two locations, that being a hard drive or cloud-based solution. All this is doing is ensuring that your information, the stuff that you have, is not only saved to one source, but you have multiple sources. If your computer crashes or dies, if a hard drive goes missing, if anything happens, you have plenty of space or plenty of areas where photos and everything can exist. It's an important thing to do, and I highly recommend it, so that way you ensure that everything is safe. I definitely would recommend trying a cloud-based solution if you've never had one before, if you're interested in it. They're great sources, they're easy to use. Google Drive, it automatically comes with your Gmail account up to a certain amount of gigaspace. OneDrive comes out of the Microsoft world, so if you're using Outlook for email or anything like that, then you'll have that availability to you. Adobe Creative Cloud is another good one too. Again, and that gives you access to all the apps like Photoshop or Lightroom, so that's a great source too. There's a bunch of different ones out there, but I highly recommend looking into a cloud-based solution if you're interested in that. Now let's look at types of cameras. There are three main types of cameras out there. DSLR mirrorless point and shoot / bridge cameras. Now, DSLRs are a digital single lens reflex camera. They have a mirror on the inside. Their predecessor, or their now more older, more sophisticated brother, is the mirrorless camera. No mirror involved in there at all. It has some better qualities to it. Point and shoot / bridge cameras are, for the most part, the same as mirrorless. The only difference is that the lenses do not get removed and there's no interchangeability like with a DSLR or mirrorless. All three of these cameras are the next step in your evolution past your cell phone or another device. All they basically are upgraded versions of what your phone can do with manual or more automatic controls, similar to the way we experience photography on an everyday basis. Let's break down a tour of your camera and make sure that you can understand it, where the buttons are, where everything is at. Then we'll get into a few other tips and tricks I recommend for beginners, and then we'll talk a little bit about lenses to end this class on a good note. First and foremost, the two main types of cameras other than bridge cameras, and those are pretty self-explanatory because they're using mirrorless technology, are mirrorless and DSLR. Now, I said that there's a mirror on the inside of the DSLR, but let's break it down a little bit more. If we look at the diagram at the very top of this slide, we can see that light cuts through the lens. That's the red line that's illustrating that. Light will bounce off the mirror into what's called a pentaprism, and then we can see out of an optical viewfinder. This basically means that if there is light available wherever we are, or image that's being available to us, if we look through the camera's digital quality, or through the camera's mirror and viewfinder, we can see something. When we're ready to take that image, the mirror flicks up, hits our image sensor, and now we've just taken a picture. On the flip side, mirrorless is light coming in, hits a shutter or a mirrored image sensor. From there, once the image then is taken, it'll burn into the sensor, and we now have our image, and we can view that through the electronic viewfinder, which should have no delay or latency, or slow latency, I should say, over the mirror or optical viewfinder. Mirrorless is lighter weight, it's smaller, it does better in low light situations, it does better video, it has better qualities overall than what you'd see in your mirrorless, in your DSLR world. Mirrorless is the way of the future when it comes to cameras. If you asked someone 20 years ago if that was the case, they would have laughed at you. That definitely wasn't the case before. But now, with how sophisticated brands like Sony, Nikon, Canon, Leica, Panasonic, Olympus, and Fujifilm have become with that, you're seeing more and more brands discontinue their DSLR lineup completely. It's probably another year or so away, but we should stop seeing the sales of DSLRs relatively soon. Okay, this is the part of class where I break down your camera and I explain all the differences within the buttons. Now, I share this with everybody just so you're aware. This diagram depicts a DSLR camera, a Nikon to be specific. Actually, it is a I think 6500. So, older model of Nikon. However, most of the buttons that you see that I'm about to break down for you are all going to be available in your new mirrorless or bridge camera. The only difference is the location of those buttons. So what I tell customers and I tell people that attend these classes, if I mention a button and you don't see it on your camera body, don't get nervous, don't think that there's something wrong with the camera. Just remember that it's probably in the camera's menu system, or it's in a different location than where you see it right now. So, without further ado, video start and stop is at the very top. Pressing that button once will start a video. Pressing the button again will stop the video. So when you have the camera turned on, that's how you can start and stop video really simply. It will be a red dot, a red circle, but something red usually on top of the camera by your trigger. Power switch, also pretty self-explanatory. One flick turns it on, the other flick the other way turns it off. The shutter release is your ability to take the picture. I call that the trigger of your camera. Push down on that once, it takes the photo, half click, and it is going to then focus your camera. Exposure compensation is a black and white symbol, kind of reminds me of the yin and yang logo or look. Except with this one, what it is it's going to be the way that you're going to control the exposure. Now exposure isn't ISO, and I don't break ISO down until next week, but exposure is how dark or light your frame is when you're taking a photo. If you're in pure darkness and you're still noticing the image doesn't look right, you hold that down, you're able to adjust to make the whole image lighter or darker. Your mode dial is similar to your gear shift on your car. That's what switches you from park to drive to neutral to reverse. In the same boat, the mode dial is controlling your ability to shoot in automatic or full manual or aperture priority, shutter priority, program auto, scenes mode, effect mode, no flash mode. There's a bunch of different options when it comes to the mode dial. I won't break all of them down today, but I'll give you a little bit of a breakdown of it hopefully in the next couple slides. The live view switch on most mirrorless cameras is going to be the button that we all know as display. But if you're shooting on a DSLR, if you flick the live view switch, that's going to switch you from a mirrored sensor, or the viewfinder, to then the digital sensor that's on your camera body. Command dial is going to be just what it says. It's a dial that controls or commands different functions of the camera. Depending on what function you're in, that will then dictate what the command is. So if you're in something like aperture priority, that could control your aperture of your lens. If you're in something like shutter priority, same idea, it can control the shutter of your lens, or of your camera body. The command dial will do whatever you have the program setting to at that moment. When it comes to any customer, even the most advanced photographer, if you're just starting with your cameras, you should always start with automatic. It's the easiest way to get into the camera, to learn a little bit more about it, to just practice taking pictures and getting used to that feel. I get a lot of customers that come in, buy a brand new camera, and the first thing they'll do is try to go into an advanced control menu system without really understanding what it is that they're doing with this camera. Start as basic as possible, then start to adjust and switch based on your own urges and needs. Now, I put this on here because while I'm showing a DSLR body and I'm explaining the differences between the cameras, and I said that it is very similar to mirrorless, just a couple things are different. The one thing that's different across every single brand that you look at is the mode dial. No two brands do their mode dial alike. So if you're buying a camera and you're getting into it for the first time, and you're looking at the different mode dials, while all of them have the same functions and features on most cameras, some are slightly different. It's important to keep that in mind. For example, the consistency on these dials are these features here. And no matter what camera you see, you're going to see this minus the B, and I'll explain why. So auto or A+, auto control over settings and functions of the whole camera. M, full manual control over the camera's array of functions. A or AV, aperture priority control. S or TV, shutter speed priority control. P is program auto. Aperture and shutter speeds are auto, but everything else is changeable. And now B, bulb. The camera is fully customizable, but as long as you're holding the shutter release, the camera will stay open. Other times you won't see this setting on there, but if you're in aperture or shutter priority, or if let's say you're in manual control, you'll have access to the B setting, which basically is the best for long exposure photography. You can keep this thing open for a very long time, and it'll help you get really amazing pictures of stars and skies and everything else. Scene modes are more so on DSLRs. Some of the early models of mirrorless might have them on there too. But basically what it is it's made for people who are intro photographers. If you're just starting, this is another way of saying automatic. Scenes would have a logo or a picture of something, and it would be programmed so that way if you're trying to take headshots, move to the head. If you're trying to take landscape, move to the mountains. If you're trying to take macro photography or close-ups, go to the flowers. For speed or movement, go to the running man. Those are all shapes and symbols that are supposed to make it easier for you to shoot automatically, but with a controlled kind of setting or a controlled variable. If you know all the photos you're taking are going to be movement based, set it to movement, that sort of thing. On the side of the camera you have the flash button. Pretty self-explanatory. Hit that button, the flash should pop up or engage. The FN button, now this can be in a few different locations on your camera. Some cameras will have multiple FN buttons, but it's function. And all function is doing is making it so that way you can control the camera and have a different setting there. You can customize function and have it be anything you want. Let's say that this FN button on the front is our focus parameter. It'll show us how big the box can be around what we're focusing. That could be a purpose for that. Maybe it's the light metering setting. Maybe it's the speed at which our focusing is working. Is it autofocus? Is it continuous? Maybe it's white balance. There's a bunch of different things the FN button can be. I recommend clicking on that on your camera to see what it is, going into your menu system and taking a look. If you want to set it to something else, you can do that. Zoom ring and focus ring. Zoom ring is going to make you zoom in and out if you have a lens that does that. Focus ring is going to be your way of focusing the lens if you're using manual focus and not automatic focus. On older lenses, you'll see a lens retract button. Hold that button down and you'll be able to untrack the lens, so that way now you can zoom in and out. If you're traveling or going somewhere, you can lock the lens into place, and the only way to release that lens to start zooming with it is the lens retract button. Lens release button, hold that down and turn the lens clockwise. That should remove the lens. Put the lens back on dot to dot and turn counterclockwise. That should lock it into place. That's your way of making sure you connect the lens properly to the bayonet system. And the bayonet system is where the camera body and the lens meet. And each camera brand has a unique bayonet system. So typically, if you're getting into photography, I always recommend buy camera lenses made for your camera itself. If you're shooting Nikon, buy a Nikon, a Tamron, a Sigma. If you're shooting Canon, buy a Canon, a Tamron, or a Sigma. If you're shooting Sony, buy the same thing, a Sony, Tamron, or Sigma. Tamron, Sigma, they're third-party companies that make great lenses, good quality lenses. So if you're looking to not spend necessarily the most amount of money on it, they make great quality lenses for a lower price. But just making sure that you buy a lens that is made for the Sony mount, the Nikon mount, the Canon mount is a very important thing. Your drive mode button, you should see that somewhere on your camera. It'll be a stack of squares and a timer. That's your ability to shoot between something like a timed photograph or something that goes on burst or high speed. On the back of our camera, we have the menu button. Clicking that will take us to a more advanced menu system within our camera. Diameter adjustment will help us when we look through the viewfinder. It's like when you go to the eye doctor and they say 1 or 2, 3 or 4, A or B. Very similar, except what that's doing is that when you put your eye up to the viewfinder, you can turn the diameter to make sure that what you're seeing is not only clear but in focus. The info button. Some cameras will have this, others don't. Canon and Nikon are famous for these two. If you have a question about what something does, you can press the info button. It should give you a nice little breakdown. If you're doing my favorite thing though, if you click image playback and you look at a photo you just took, especially if it's an automatic and you're like, wow, what did I do? What did the camera do to get such a good photo? You can press the info button and it'll break things down like shutter, aperture, ISO, what the focus parameter was, what it locked onto, that sort of thing. That's great information to help you, the photographer, figure out exactly what you did to take that good photo, especially if you're brand new. Focus and exposure lock. If you are focusing in on a subject matter and you want to lock that into place, you can press that button and it'll lock your your focus and exposure into place. What that then does is as you move the camera around, rather than it readjusting, it'll stay locked into where you had it before. It's a really nice thing if you're doing still photography and you're not moving from subject to subject. It could really help a lot. Image playback button, said that already, hit the play button, and then that'll then give you the images you just took. You could then use the multi-selector to scroll through those, press OK on certain images. You can hit the delete button as well, which is below that. That'll then delete, hit OK to confirm. I skipped over the I button, but that's a very important one. Some cameras will have it as FN, some cameras will have it as Q, other cameras will have it as I. And what that basically is another menu system, a quick cut menu system for you to get in to change and alter certain things on your physical camera. The magnifier and demagnifier are great tools if you want to see your images very closely. And I recommend doing it because you can really zoom in on an image and get a clear kind of cut to what it actually is that, how sharp the image is. For a beginning photographer, I think that's an awesome tool. For any photographer at all, I think it's a great tool because you really can take the time to make sure that the image, it looks right, it's in focus, and that you don't have any issues with it. My camera doesn't work. I love showing this photo. I don't know if the customer even knows that I show this to them, show this out, but people all the time send me this image. Or I had a customer one time send me this image, and it really made me laugh because we talked about it when she came in to show me the camera, and what it really came down to is the fact that she just didn't know how to use the camera. She, instead of using automatic, decided to go to the advanced settings on the camera and didn't quite understand the art of taking a picture at the moment. And so I like to stress this to customers, to people, to anybody getting into photography. Photography is an amazing, amazing hobby. It's a fun skill to have, but it can be time consuming. It doesn't come overnight. I don't get to teach these classes because I learned how to do this a week before. I've spent years mastering photography and getting better and better at it. And there's still so many things I don't know because I don't personally do them. So what I always tell people as a whole is, as you want to get better and better at photography, you keep learning the more advanced skills. When you're just starting, you begin with the basics. I also use the expression of, it's not the baseball player, it's not the baseball bat, it's the baseball player. Just because you yourself can't hit the baseball doesn't mean it's the bat's fault. So just because you can't take that photo, it doesn't mean it's the camera's fault. You just have to learn how to use it and be patient with it. So start with automatic, get your reps in, get your practice in, and then continue to go from there. Your camera isn't a smartphone. So when you think about it, the cell phone companies like Samsung and Apple, even Google and some of the other companies, they've really cornered the market when it comes to photography. And the reason they've cornered the market is because they've really made it where when you're starting to take pictures and getting into photography, they make it easy for you to just point and shoot the camera. That being said, when customers get into using a more advanced camera, they're a little turned off because it's not as simple or as quick of a response. The automatic setting on your camera can do a really great job. However, it's still never going to look perfect until you get into more manual control. Where it's very fun and unique is the flexibility and the beautifulness that a camera can really produce for you for your photography. When it comes down to it, there's a lot of things your phone is going to automatically do that you're going to have to get used to manually controlling on your camera. But I promise you, if you can master it and get better at it, you'll notice the difference night and day between your photos on your phone and your photos on your camera. This is a simple one, but I like to talk about it. Holding your camera. The two biggest things that plague photographers and artists alike is arthritis and carpal tunnel. Making sure that you use your arms as a support system underneath your camera and making sure you keep a nice straight back as you're shooting will help a couple different things. One, if your elbows are underneath and you're shooting in a city area or in a tight location, people can't knock into you, maybe possibly getting you to drop your camera or disrupting you from the photo you're taking, giving yourself a little less space when you're shooting, which in that turn then makes it less likely for people to hit you or run into you. Keeping your back straight will help with any type of weight or problems that you might have because of your camera itself. My camera that I use is extremely heavy. That being said, when I take it out with me, it weighing a bunch definitely adds to the experience of, okay, well now I have this beast with me and I gotta be careful. Focus, then shoot, and shoot through the picture. Happens all too often that people just click, 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 and they don't take the time to use those automatic focus settings that the camera has, or even manual settings that the camera has to focus. Focus the camera, then shoot, and shoot through the picture. Again, when you're taking the picture, it's not just one thing that's happening in the frame, it's multiple things. There's a lot of different factors that go into taking a good photo. So keep your eye out for those things and don't just expect the photo to be perfect. There's going to be times where you take a bad photo and you can always retake or edit or do something to help you get better at it. But primarily, the first starting point to any good photo is to focus and then shoot through the entirety of the image, not just one or two little things that are happening on the frame. If you or the camera are moving, you will get blurry photos. There are tons of artists out there that made millions and a whole career based on blurry photos. As a beginning photographer, though, you are not that person. And I think that's a huge thing to keep in mind. You are a starting photographer who is just getting into this whole world. Rather than sit there and pretend like you have a full understanding of what you're doing, practice, get used to having the camera, and work on taking photos that are still but clear and concise. It goes a long way when you're really getting into photography and getting into the shooting. Now, the age-old saying in the photography world, and it still exists to this day, date your body, marry your glass. The biggest thing I can tell customers, and I say to always keep in mind, is that the camera body itself will become outdated and used. Camera bodies are similar to cars. Your car has mileage on there, and when it hits a certain point, the car starts to die. With your camera has a shutter count, and that shutter count will last you for a good long time until it doesn't. And so that's an important thing to remember. But if you invest your money wisely into your lenses and your lens collection, you're going to over time have a beautiful assortment of lenses that have great quality, less distortion, good background to foreground separation, let a lot of light in, and you can eventually move those to other camera systems or setups that you own. But if you are just buying the cheaper lenses and very expensive camera bodies, over time you're going to notice some image problems or distortions than if you were to go the other way around. So depending on your means in shopping, I always strongly recommend to put majority of the money you can into your lens and buy whatever body you can afford at that time. Now, if you want to do it the other way, absolutely, but I would recommend saving and trying to build up your arsenal of lenses and getting the best quality. When it comes to lenses, we got a couple different things we can break down to help understand a little bit better. So, first and foremost, focal length. Focal length and zoom are basically the same thing. The more that you're zooming in on the lens, the more that you're playing with the focal length. The wider the lens number is, the lower the lens number is, the wider the angle is. The bigger the lens number, the tighter the focus becomes. Now, why is that important? And this is a nice little example. At 70 millimeters, we can see the water, the swampy area, we can see partial green, and what seems to be a mountain range with a town in front. As we get into the 105, we see more of the birds ahead of us, and the background starts to get closer. As we get to 200, the background's even closer, the birds are right there, and at 400, we're on top of the birds, and the background is so close that we no longer have a skyline anymore. We can see the mountains in the background that were there before, but in a close-up view. Keep in mind, with zoom, you're not just bringing the object that you're taking a photo in of closer. You're bringing everything in closer. And the more tight our view gets on whatever it is we're focusing on, the more we're pulling that background forward towards us, bringing it more into the frame. Focal length and compression, though, go hand in hand, so keep that in mind. The more that we zoom in, the more that we expand our image. So for example, at 200 millimeters, the boy's face is big and wide, but at 20 millimeters, the face is narrow and the nose is coming straight for us. That is the type of thing that you get with focal length and compression. In the world of cameras, the 50 millimeter, the 75, the 35, or the 35, 50, and 85 are the three perfect portrait lenses. 50 being the most perfect because it's the same exact replica of the human eye. Those are going to be the big three that give real zero compression and give us the most honest picture that we could get of our subject. You can also see too, as we're zooming, not only are we compressing or expanding this kid's face, but we're also bringing that background extremely close to the point where we have what looks to be mountains or buildings on the right side and a tree and a sky, then just having the tree and the tree's center stalk. I can't think of trunk. I couldn't think of what the tree. That's funny. But yeah. Now, common lenses that you're going to see nowadays in the world, what you should be looking at, and then I'm going to give you my opinion for the three that you need. So, first and foremost, a kit lens. Why is it a kit lens? Well, typically, when you're buying a kit lens, it's an inexpensive lens, I should say, that comes with your camera. It's a great way to get started into photography without necessarily investing a whole lot of money into it. And it gives you, the user, the ability to get something that's not necessarily going to, set the world on fire, but it's not going to break your bank either. So if you're intro to photography, you've never done this before, you can listen to friends' recommendations. I have a lot of photography friends that recommend buying this lens with this body or that lens with this body, and that's great. But a lot of people, when they're first starting, have no clue what they want to take pictures of. They're like, I want to take pictures of my family and maybe some other stuff, or I just want to take pictures of architecture and nature. I just want to take pictures of interior or portraits or street photography. That's great. But then you might want to venture off and try some new stuff. Without buying a bigger, more expensive lens, the kit lens is a great way to get into it. In this case, the kit lens that you see on the slide is an 18 to 55, and it has a variable f-stop of 3.5 to 5.6. Now tomorrow during intermediate cameras, we're going to break down a little bit more of what that exactly means. But 3.5 to 5.6 is a variable aperture, meaning that the light it's letting in isn't as good as something that has a continuous 1.4 or a continuous 2.8. And we'll talk about examples on that in a second. But overall, this is a nice starting point for any photographer to get into the world of photography without, again, investing too much. Nifty 50 or a prime lens. So a Nifty 50 is what we call a prime lens. A prime lens is a lens that has one singular number, in this case 50 millimeters. We call it the Nifty 50 because it's nifty. But the 50 millimeter is considered one of the perfect portrait lenses because scientists and engineers way back when they were figuring out how camera lenses will acquaint to numbers such as the millimeter size, which also have nothing to do with real millimeters. It is a engineered number that scientists and developers who've been making lenses for decades and generations now determined for their lenses. It's not quantifiable with a ruler. It's something that works internally with the way that the glass is set up in between. So take that for what it's worth. However, when you look at a 50 millimeter lens, you're going to notice it has one number on there. It's a prime lens. So 35, 85, 50 mil, prime numbers. Prime number lenses are great because they not only take fantastic portraits and have really good quality, they typically have the best aperture you can get. So like on the kit lens, I said it was a 3.5 to 5.6 being a variable aperture, meaning the way it lets light in varies on what size you zoom in and out of. The 50 is going to stay, in this case, at 1.4 the whole time. That's a whole lot of light it's letting into the lens. That's a whole lot of background to foreground separation that the lens can give you. So it's a fantastic piece of glass It's a great lens to have in your collection. It's one of my personal favorites when shooting, but I will say my personal favorite of all time is a 35 millimeter. Zoom or telephoto lenses are great lenses to have as well too. They're the next one up. So where a prime lens is a singular lens or singular number, a zoom or a telephoto number is a mix of numbers. They're typically bulkier, bigger numbers. Depending on the quality of glass you can get, the best quality is a 2.8. So meaning that the aperture on there is 2.8 and it's going to be continuous. So if you start at 24, zoom to 70, or zoom back down, you're always going to have a 2.8 on there. The entry-level ones, or the cheaper ones that usually don't cost as much but still deliver good quality, are your variable zoom. So much like the kit lens, you might see one that's 3.5 to 5.6. Fantastic lens, still a great lens, but again, just depends. What's the big difference between prime and zoom lenses? A prime lens is a singular number, weighs a little bit less, and it has a good aperture closer to like a 1.4, 1.2, but 2. But the worst part about a prime lens is that there's no zoom. So if I want to get a picture and I want to get it better in frame, I got to back up or get closer. On the flip side, with our zoom lens, I don't have to zoom into something. I don't have to walk away to get closer or further away. I can zoom. On the flip side of that, though, the lenses are heavier, they're bulkier, and if you're looking at something that's closer to that 2.8 continuous, it's big money. You're going to spend a bunch to get a lens that clear and beautiful. The last lens I like to share is the travel lens. Now, why does a travel lens exist? So, the customer I would sell this lens to is the one who's going on vacation. I get so many people that come in and they're so excited they're going on a safari. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. They've been saving, waiting to do it, and then the family, they're all going to go. Well, when they're on safari, they are going to see pictures of lions, but they're also going to be within different towns or locations, and they want to make sure that they're getting pictures of that landscape or architecture. They're also going to see things way off in the distance that they want to get pictures of. How do you accommodate for all that? They also are on little jumper planes for the most part that have weight restrictions and limits. All that being said, if that's the case, you're going to need to make sure that you have a camera body or a camera lens that can basically do everything you want it to do. That's where a travel lens comes into place. And something like this 18 to 135 is a great example of that. It starts at a low number, 18, meaning super wide. And then it zooms into a 135, which is a pretty up-close image of whatever it is you're trying to get. That's a great way for you as a photographer to get the expansion of a nice lens that does all the millimeter sizes. However, it has the ability for you to then zoom out and in of things without necessarily needing to move your body. The downside to this is the variable aperture. This is 3.5 to 5.6, meaning that if you're shooting in nighttime, you might have some hard times with it. If you're trying to get the most crisp, clean image every time, you might also have some difficulty with it. But if you can master photography and get more comfortable with it, this lens can serve you for a long time and probably be one of the only ones you use in your arsenal. Now, what lenses do you need? And I put quotations around need because I think it's an important thing to think about. You don't necessarily need any lenses, and you might honestly, as you start playing with this, see what you do actually use and what you don't use. So the three lenses are the Trinity. And the Trinity starts with a prime lens, a 50 millimeter preferably. Then it jumps to a 24 to 70. Then it jumps to a 70 to 200. If you have these three lenses, you technically have everything in between that you might ever need. Now, I tell people this all the time, just because you see these numbers and people say they have their Trinity, this doesn't mean it works for every single person. I personally love a 35 millimeter prime, but I also love the 24 to 70. Both are considered the ultimate street walking lenses. Both do very, very similar things. The 50mm is my perfect portrait lens. However, when I'm out and about and I'm shooting in nature or wilderness, the 70-200 is my favorite companion, but sometimes I can get away with a 24-70. There's also times where I'm taking architecture photography and I like to use a 16-35. Where I'm getting at with this is that no matter what people say is what you need, it comes down to you, the photographer. So as you start taking pictures and mastering photography and you start playing with what's available and what you're doing, that's where you are going to learn what works best for you and what doesn't. And you're going to invest in that appropriately. To sit there and say that this is the lens that you need and that's it would be foolish of me. And for anybody else to tell you that, I don't think that's appropriate either. I think that you need to take the time, especially with a kit lens if that's the route you're going. Take some photos, get used to what that kit lens does. You can always trade that in and get a better lens later on. I think that's an important thing customers don't realize when it comes to the kit lenses. They immediately want to jump to the best quality. And that's totally fine if you have the money to spend on it. But keep in mind that there are lenses out there for all sorts of purposes and things. And some people have lenses that they use for things that people would consider that you never use that lens for. So it's up to you, the photographer. There's no one purpose for one lens. Some of the last things I'll give to you are use your timer in your camera app. Both are fantastic. The timer on your camera is great for you to take pictures and to take the time to take the photos. Set a 3-second or 10-second timer, jump in front of the camera, and you can then use it. The camera app, though, can act as a remote, which might be just as good as using the timer on there as well, because you can actually set the camera app up and then use it as a remote to take your photo. Here's some content creation at a glance. This is stuff that we'll get a little bit more into in the advanced photography section. But things to keep in mind are video quality, stabilization, lighting, and mics. When it comes to video quality, make sure you're using proper lenses to shoot your content. Make sure you have proper camera body with the settings turned down that you want on. If you're just getting into it, maybe find someone you really like online. Mimic what they're doing. One of the biggest forms of flattery in the art world is copying somebody. And most every single artist that you meet out there has copied another artist in one way or the other in order for them to develop their own personal style. We all see something beautiful and creative and we want to make something similar ourselves. That's how artistry works. Stabilization is important too. When you're doing all this, make sure you have proper tripods or gimbals in order to make sure that you're focusing in on and stabilizing your shot, especially if you have a shaky grip. Lighting. Natural lighting is awesome. If you can shoot stuff outside with proper sunlight, fantastic. However, we are getting into the winter time here in Chicago, and with that being said, we're getting less and less sun, more and more cloudy days. So studio lighting's great, on-camera lighting is great. Any way for you to just make sure that you're using what's available to you to get proper lighting and whatnot around you is going to be helpful. Last thing is microphones. Things like shotgun mics, on-camera mics, wireless mics. Those are all important things. Think about it the same way as your TV. They make these TVs beautiful nowadays, but then they kind of skimp out on the sound, and they encourage you to buy sound bars in order to increase the sound. Microphones are the same way. They make real tiny plastic microphones on your camera bodies. When you're recording, they don't sound that good. Get a microphone that can clip on, wireless mic that can Bluetooth connect. You won't regret it. Easy ways to get into content creation are looking at the content creator kits. There's some awesome things out there that you can purchase that basically allow you to connect your camera to and from the actual unit. Makes it real easy for you to listen to your to get your content up and running without necessarily needing to buy an expensive setup or without really knowing what to get. They give you things like a microphone, an SD card, and a handle of some sort that has a remote function to it. Makes it super easy to get this whole thing connected and running. I'm going to recommend a couple different accessories here for you, but things you should be looking at are bags. Protect the gear that you just bought. You spent a lot of money on it. Get an extra battery and an extra memory card. Again, you can arrive to an event, find out that just because you charged your battery a week ago, it already is at 50-30%, and now you've got less time to take your photos. Have that extra battery. Extra memory cards are great too. If one doesn't work, like I said, always have two. It's nice to have a backup for that. Lens cleaning kits, do not use your sweater or your t-shirt. Put a cleaning cloth kit or a solution inside your bag that you can use at all times. It goes a long way. Get a camera strap, keep it around your neck. You can get padded ones if you like to get something with a little more protection for your neck. Tripods are important. External hard drives are great. Filters are fantastic for your lenses as you learn those. Additional lenses like we just talked about. And take other classes and workshops. I'm one resource that you have here at Apt Electronics, but there are so many sources out there. Oakton Community College teaches a non-accredited class for people who are just interested in photography, and it's still taught by professors that teach accredited classes for photography. So it gives you, the person, a way of taking a class and learning more about something that you're getting into without necessarily, going to college for years about it. There are so many people that get into photography later on in life. You can be one of those people too. If you really, really get into this, there's so much you can do and learn with it. It can become a new career avenue for you too, for a lot of people. Last thing I'll leave you on is the bitterness of poor quality remains long after the sweetness of a low price is forgotten. If you invest in photography, you will learn right away that it does not necessarily mean you can skip out and just get fly-by deals. Sometimes you're going to have to buy the more expensive equipment. And it'll show in the quality or image when you cheaped out. You're going to regret the fact that you didn't wait and save your money for the better product, that you bought yourself, the cheaper model, and you realize later on that what the defects and what the problems are with that. Can't say right off the bat you'll notice, but as you become more experienced, you're going to start to notice. I look at artwork I made years ago and I see what I'm making now and I laugh, but I'm proud of myself for how far I've come along. Photography is no different. However, if I were to continue using that old stuff that I didn't pay a lot of money for until now, I'm going to forget about that because the bitterness of that poor quality is going to remain with me versus the good deal that I maybe got on that stuff. So that's one of my favorite quotes. I don't use it often, but I use it for photography because it is one of those things where money goes a long way in photography, and the more you can invest in your tools and your equipment, it's going to help in the long run. That's all I got for you guys. So I think I said it at the very beginning of this class, but our week or our month for October is a little different than past months, only because I will be out of town and cannot teach the camera classes while I'm out. So tomorrow, October the 4th, is going to be our intermediate class, so we're going to run that instead of next Thursday. We will then pick back up with camera classes starting on the 24th, so 3 Thursdays from now. We will then have class the 24th and the 25th of next month, because then the following Thursday is October 31st, Halloween, and I don't think anybody really wants to have a camera class that day. So, again, the 3rd of this month, which was today, was our beginner class. Tomorrow, the 4th, is going to be our intermediate class. The 24th of October, so 2 Thursdays from now, 3 Thursdays from now, that's going to be our advanced camera class. And then the 25th will be beyond the traditional camera. So I hope that helps. I hope you all understand. If you have any questions on this, please always feel free to reach out or ask questions. I'm going to stay up for a few more minutes here. If anybody has any questions, you can chat it in. If not, my email, phone number are listed below. Call or email me at any time if you have any type of questions that I can answer for you. Again, I'll stay open for a couple more minutes here, and then I'll jump off. All right, well, it doesn't look like anybody has any questions for me tonight, so it's not a problem. If anything comes up, please do let me know. As always, my name is Saxon. I'm in the camera department here at Apt Electronics. If you have any questions in the future, feel free to reach out. And if you don't want to talk to me and you want to talk to somebody else, call our small electronics department at any time, or our customer service will direct you over to small electronics. We're right by the fish tank here in the store, so we can always help if you need it.